So today I'm joined by Jaskanwal Singh, and I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself and also discuss your Sikhi journey.
So first, I just want to say Waheguru ka Khalsa, Waheguru ki Fateh. Thank you for having me. I'm grateful to be here and speak to you, especially on topics related to Sikhi, which I love. And the non-Sikhi part of my journey, it's actually interesting because so much of that, like many people, ties in with that Sikhi journey because of the lessons I learned, the experiences I went through, and just the thirst that was built up for a deeper kind of need or longing for a search within a fulfillment of the realization of what my purpose in life is, and just to kind of really contemplate and wonder what existence really means for me. So a lot of that tied in with that, and just to backtrack, when I was a kid, I had a turban, um, and I didn't grow up knowing anything about the history, the ethos of Sikhi, any Sakhis, and just even knowing, why I wore a turban, what Gais meant for me, what it meant for Sikhi. Um, and a lot of that was because my parents, they were suffering, from the trauma of the genocides and the pain back home, and that kind of maybe scared them off of teaching me about Sikhi, and maybe just made them more assimilate into Western society here in Canada. And my dad, for example, when he came here, he was a Sardar, and he cut his hair because of racial profiling, being abused by cops, being attacked, and I think he felt he had to conform to get a job and to take care of the family. And so, yeah, I didn't grow up with a strong foundation for Sikhi, and that made it very easy for other people to point out my turban or make fun of me for it. And even though I would fight back if that was ever the case against anyone who tried to like touch my turban or fight me and bully me, it still left a lasting impression because I wasn't able to mentally or intellectually, even emotionally process why I was being teased for something so prominent about me. And it was something I actually enjoyed, my mom tying my hair, tying my turban and combing my hair and taking care of that for me. But I didn't even, I didn't ask her myself what the importance of it was. In relation to Sikhi, all I would ask was, why I had to keep my hair when I was getting teased. And she would say the kind of general things that many people say to their kids when they're younger, which is, for Babaji, for God, just, you have to keep your hair. And it stopped making sense to me. And the intellectual kind of insecurity of not being able to explain myself to those kids just left me in a state where I just wanted to cut my hair and just fit in. So that ties in with who I was because as a kid, and even still today, the things I enjoyed most, and a bit more about myself relates to writing, reading. I love poetry. I love philosophy. These are the things that I gravitated towards as a kid. But when I cut my hair, I conform to more of the hyper masculine identities and people around me, my older brother, my older cousins, the older guys in that neighborhood we grew up in, which was a neighborhood filled with crime, filled with violence, filled with drinking, drugs, police encounters, a lot of gang culture. And as I cut my hair and gained this new kind of identity, also because my name being mispronounced a lot, from Jaskanwal, it was mispronounced a lot, and I changed that name to Jesse as I cut my hair as well. So this new identity just meant that I strayed away from many of the things that made me happy and made me me, and found my way into the same types of things that the older generations around me found their way in because of the alcoholism and abuse that many of the Punjabi fathers in the neighborhood inflicted upon their families, their children, as a way for them to maybe take their mind off, everything that happened back home and the intergenerational trauma they suffered through. So that just led to a whirlwind, drinking, fights, drugs, and and police encounters and all those sorts of things that for 19 years or so, I was totally away from Sikhi, would only go to the Gurdwara if there was a wedding or maybe, a Nagar Kirtan here and there um, or New Year's a few times. And yeah, that that led me to eventually 2 years ago being really unfulfilled and somehow, with Kerpa, we'll touch on this later perhaps, I found my way to Sikhi, and so that's a bit of where I come from. I went to York University. I took undergrad. I took criminology, sorry, for my undergrad program. I went to law school in Ottawa as well. I'm currently studying for my bar exams. I've worked at a few law firms. I've worked with few nonprofit organizations. I work with youth as well for mental health awareness, workshops related to substance abuse. I've written a book and I published that about a year and a half ago. And so those are the things that I'm currently working on and have worked on to this point.
I think it's so important and actually really interesting that you mentioned bullying, because in my last podcast, I discussed bullying following an incident that happened here in the UK where a young Sikh boy was bullied and had his buttock pulled off and his gas was pulled. And we spoke about this conversation of how when a kid would ask their parents why they keep their gas, they were never really given answers as to the actual reason as to why they kept their gas. And you saying that has also like justified my discussion from last week where I was saying that parents should start to try and educate their child a lot more about why we keep our gas and why it's so important, because I feel like that would help a lot of young Singhs and young Gaurs when they're on this journey, which isn't easy because of things that happen in school, getting bullied. Obviously it's different and a lot of kids don't like different, they're not used to different, so when they see different their reaction isn't always the greatest. And also touching on your book, which I will definitely want to get my hands on one day, because I've seen pages of your book that you've posted on Instagram, and it's called Feminism Saved My Life and It May Just Save the World. And this like very much links to one of the topics for today, which is poetry, and you write a lot of poetry. So how did you start writing poetry, and what do you normally express throughout your poetry and in your writing?
So as a kid, my favorite thing to do in school-wise and even after school, was write. I loved writing stories. I loved writing essays. I loved writing just, my thoughts, journaling. And as I grew older, I loved writing rap, freestyling, poetry. But I kept a lot of that hidden, you could say. It's common for guys to withhold a lot of their emotions, suppress a lot of things. And I kind of felt as if the way I grew up was such that, you didn't express yourself, whether it's through writing, whether it's through, even just wanting someone to listen to you, be there for you. That wasn't really a thing. Everyone was just covering up their wounds or covering up what they were going through by drinking, by partying, by, going clubbing, by chasing women, by chasing external validation or just escapism. And so I kept a lot of that just to myself, and kind of tied in with that masculine identity. And I got away from it as well for a long time when I started going to school for criminology and law school, because I was just consumed by that rat race mentality
Mm-hmm.
of just pursuing a prestigious kind of legal position, and I got away from that creativity, and I slowly found my way back to that, based in part of what you mentioned, the book that I published, which was Feminism Saved My Life and It May Just Save the World, because I feel that so much of my ego and my identity up until that point was consumed by that masculine upbringing I grew up around. And feminism, it's not well received by many people, especially men, but really what it means is to break down the ways in which gender identities have been created for us, whether through media, whether through our upbringing, through families, through friends, through schools, and just really understand that there's much more to us than these identities. And to truly create an equal society, we have to be aware of how we've been programmed as, as men and women, and as masculine and feminine identities, and how to create a more balanced approach to that. So for me, that helped me really understand that many of the things that I was really, passionate about, it was okay for me to embrace that. And it was silly, to hide so much of who I was, and to suppress that just based on this conditioning, and based on the fact that, I had started drinking when I was 15 years old, and binging up until the age of 28 or so. So 13, 14 years of binging every weekend. Maybe, maybe I'd stop for a weekend or two, but it was a pretty consistent, Friday, Saturday, banquet hall parties, wedding weeks, which, in our community lasts the whole week. So it was a lot. And that didn't allow for me to take time to myself and just process things that I had gone through. And all of these things just made me realize, as I was writing my thoughts, which ended up, into that book, that during this process of introspection and reflection, that so much of what I wanted to express and share with the world, and so much of who I was being hidden. And that kind of just came about through writing. So it helped me embrace more of that, inner child within me that I had strayed away from. And that helped me get back to my roots, helped me understand that writing was really important for me to just make sense of things, as a way for me to express myself, as a way for me to just put into words so many of the swirling, thoughts that I have, or feelings that I have. And now I just write about anything I feel passionate about. I write about things, if I share with them, if I share them, write about things that may help people. When people reach out to me and tell me that what I have to say or what I shared with them really helped, I try to just do more of that. Anything I can do where my voice just resonates with anyone.
That idea of breaking away from toxic masculinity, because nowadays, I feel like culturally as well, a lot of brown male kids cannot go to their parents with certain issues, because you will get the response, banda banja, like,
Mm-hmm.
even in general, people will go like, be a man about it. And I think that's why I was so intrigued by your book and the title of your book, because it just brings everyone to the same level, which is something that the world has really struggled with, for years and years now. So I've actually read a few of your poems that you've posted, and there was one that I actually reposted, and it was about Maya. And you discuss Maya in a very metaphorical sense. And for anyone that doesn't know, Maya is any type of illusion or doubt that can essentially drive you away from Sikhi, and drive you away from the truth. And you describe Maya as something that was trying to sink your boat. I think you said trying to sink your boat in storms. And I think right now everyone is kind of facing Maya. And what really interested me with that poem was when you were saying that Maya works so tirelessly to try and break us down. And it really brings about how effortless Sikhi is, and how easy it is to gain that connection with Waheguru, with Guru Sahib, as opposed to obviously being indulged in this world of Maya, where there is drug abuse and alcoholism and all of these things. And what really interests me about poetry and connecting that more to Sikhi is how the Guru Granth Sahib Ji itself is written. It's written using many literary methods, in the sense of, when you read Gurdwani, it will roll off your tongue. And it obviously takes talent to write like that. No one be able to write the way that the Guru Granth Sahib Ji is written. But it really just shows that poetry, or anything that rolls off your tongue as such, will really resonate, and it really stays with people. So I like the fact that you take a lot of topics and you use that to write about, and you discuss topics that people need to know about a lot more now. And going back to what you said about creativity as well, I feel like Sikhi is very creative in the sense of writing, and in the sense of kirtan as well. The use of instruments in itself is very creative. So that's probably one thing that I love about Sikhi the most. It is that ability to be creative. But how would you link Sikhi and your poetry? Was there any, while you were writing poetry, because I know you've written a lot of poetry about Sikhi as well, but was there anything that really linked the two together for you?
I feel that as I started to find my voice and as I started to embrace, more of that writer side to me, um, especially within the last few years, poetry helped me make sense of my feelings and my emotions and my thoughts, and it helped me really heal, right through a lot of the things that I was uh, I was putting off by way of alcoholism or by way of just the company I was around, by way of relationships I was getting myself entangled into, that ended up being toxic. And a lot of that was because of the pitfalls that Sikhi, warns us about, whether it's attachment, whether it's just voids, right? Because with attachment, I feel like the more attached you are to something, it can really show you that there's a void within. Because if we're empty or if we're suffering from within, it's easier for us to get more attached to something to give us that sense of meaning to our lives. And once I started seeing that so many of these um, attachments for me weren't really fulfilling, they were very temporary. They didn't bring me any sort of real contentment, whether that was in the legal field, whether that was the prestige of a job, which we grow up around in our communities. Have this job, and what are people going to say? And you want to put yourself out there like this so that people think this of you, and and just as growing up, within relationships that many people flock to or get themselves into, um, without knowing, why they're really getting into that. As I started to process these feelings, it tied in with so much of the lessons that I was learning from a Sikhi perspective through watching, basics of Sikhi, through watching Nanak, through watching all these YouTube videos around Sikhi. And, obviously, Dhan Guru Granth Sahib Ji, it's, written in poetry. And Sikhi has always meant kind of poetry for me. It's always meant poetry and philosophy, and our gurus were poets, they were philosophers, um, they were rebels, there were so much, they were kings, they were just full of love and full of artistic expression. Um, and and as I started healing and learning my roots again, I just felt that writing out poetry about Sikhi just helped me feel more connected to Sikhi myself. So sometimes, in my journals that I have just written by hand, sometimes I'll just take some teachings from Sikhi or Bani, and I'll just expand on it in my own words and write poetry about it myself. So it helps me build that connection and love, and it helps me understand it from my own thoughts and experiences, because we all have a personal relationship with the divine, and for me a lot of that personal relationship gets strengthened through poetry.
And I've not noticed a lot of your more recent poetry is about the farmer protests in India at the moment and all over the world, actually. But this issue is uh, based in India, and just briefly to summarize that, as of right now, up to 70% of India's population survive on farming. But as of recently, the Indian government have passed three new bills, three new laws, which have exploited farmers. The first being them taking away the minimum support price, which means that corporations can pretty much exploit farmers who are very poor already, but also just pay them like pennies here. And the second being that farmers cannot take their disputes between themselves and private corporations to court. And then the third being that private companies can store as much food products as they want, but obviously farmers can't store the food. So we see where the problem is, because farmers are, selling their crops in bulk for very little money, even smaller than before. And even though farmers are being exploited, there's nowhere that they can go for support because they can't take their disputes to court. And as a result of that, farmers have taken their protests from Punjab to Delhi. Now, Delhi is about 230 miles away from Punjab. So we have our elders cycling to Delhi or going on tractors to Delhi. Now, here that would take roughly about 8 hours, but we all know what the traffic's like. The traffic is like in India, so let's say it takes them a day to get to Delhi, but it's not that easy either because on the way to Delhi, they were faced with tear gas. They've been sprayed with water. Bearing in mind that it is very cold in India at the moment, and a lot of the protesters, as I said, they're elderly, so they've been getting very sick, and unfortunately, some of them have passed away. And as of recently, they've started to get beaten as well by the police officers that are there, and the mainstream media hasn't really covered anything about protests. I think recently BBC had published an article about it, so did Sky News, and I still feel like they haven't done justice to it. They really haven't spoken about it enough. And if we talk about the media in India itself, they are obviously portraying this in a very negative way, despite the protests being very peaceful. And there's not, no one's really causing any problems other than what the police officers, the military there are doing themselves. And recently they've started to install internet jammers. So internet jammers are just ways of stopping people that are at these protests from using the internet and being able to publish videos, pictures, or information on social media. And now we've seen this before. We've seen a social media blackout in 1984, and it's kind of mirroring all of that, which is horrible, not just for us, but for the elderly that are, laying on the streets, the cold streets of India, trying to protest and get the government to take these bills back and not enforce them as they are doing. And I've noticed that you've been speaking a lot about how the media isn't covering this, but also how influencers are not covering these problems as well. So why is it important for people to educate themselves on this issue, and for people with these large platforms to discuss these problems?
I think I think at the base of it is just the fact that, you know, the profession of farming is one that literally, like, we all need. We all enjoy, food. We don't grow our food ourselves, for the most part. The majority of the population. I feel like there's such a lack of gratitude when we don't acknowledge where we get our sustenance from, where we get, our food from, where we get what we need to survive on a daily basis. And we're just enjoying and consuming on the backs of people who are being taken advantage of. So that's there for sure. Another thing is that when there's injustice, violence, and when there's a threat to democracy and peace, and people are being abused when they're peacefully protesting, to look the other way, whoever we are, whatever platform one has, whoever one is, you're perpetuating that. And we can see in history the biggest travesties that have happened, the biggest tragedies that have happened, the biggest genocides that have happened, whether it's Hitler, whether it's, whoever. These things happen when people don't stand up, and it's when people don't speak up against these things that tyrants or bullies or whoever it is, whether it's on a micro level or on a macro level, they feel like they can get away with it. And this is why it's important for the news and for people, politicians and influencers, whoever, even if your platform is small or big, just to spread that message, and to continue doing that, not just for this issue, but for so many issues, whether it's what's happening in Palestine, whether it's what's happening with the religious ban, on hijabs, that apparently it's happening in even more countries. Like whatever issue it is, when there's a threat to people just wanting to freely live, whether it's related to hunger, whether it's related to religion, whether it's related to anything where someone just wants to freely live when they're not hurting anyone, then we should all stand up and speak up. And so much of the coverage that has happened is biased, and it doesn't cover the violence that's been happening. It doesn't cover the abuse that the protesters have been going through. And here, there's a news channel agency, who CBC, right? They have a station in India, CBC India, but all that CBC here, up until now, my knowledge now, what they reported on was the exact same report that CBC India did, and CBC India, the Indian news is so biased there against Sikhs. So they reported that when Justin Trudeau, our prime minister, spoke in support of allowing protesters to peacefully protest without being subject to violence, when that happened, the Indian news, they accused our prime minister Justin Trudeau of legitimizing extremism, and they said that the Canadian protesters who were literally just peacefully protesting outside the Indian consulate here, they said that we were extremists and that we were threatening the livelihoods of those people working at the consulate, and that was coming from India. But what CBC here did, they just copied that report, right? They didn't say anything to report on the fact that we were peacefully protesting. They didn't do anything to counter that narrative, and they easily could have, because anyone here that's downtown, that's at these rallies, they can see that there's nothing but peaceful protests happening. And likewise, there's nothing but peaceful protests happening in India, where the protesters are even giving langar and food to the police. So I think it's important just to speak up, just because of all of those reasons, and because literally the people who don't speak up, they're setting a precedent as well for our youth and for people growing up to not know what it means to be accountable ethically, spiritually, or as a person. We I think would want a society where people don't have to think twice about doing the right thing, and we can all grow up and be that guidance for young people to really know what it means to be ethical and responsible for their accountability, especially if they have big platforms and big voices, which obviously can dictate people's views and thoughts.
Like what you were saying, we actually experienced something very similar. There's been a couple of rallies in the UK already, one in London and one in Birmingham. Now, at the one in Birmingham, there was an Indian reporter who was actually standing in the middle of the protest and reporting back on an Indian news channel, saying that we were terrorists and extremists. And obviously the news in India is very against Sikhs in general, but this is just like adding to their fire essentially. But how was the protest there? Because I assume it would be very, very similar, but obviously it must have been bigger in Toronto.
Yeah, there's a huge, Sikh population here, a big Punjabi community here, and yeah, there were a lot of people. There were, it felt like thousands and thousands at some rallies. The energy was good. It was peaceful. It felt like a Nagar Kirtan. It felt like there's so many people. There's so many people holding signs. There's so many people, just in a state of unity, which is nice, right? Because considering the circumstances, obviously it's not ideal, why we have to protest, but despite that, it is bringing people together. We are, all trying to make the best of the situation and find the silver lining, which is that we're growing stronger together. And regardless, of who's with us or who's supporting us, we're all there together. We're all uniting, and eventually, we will demand to be heard. So when we stick together, and I think that we're starting to realize that when we stick together and we have this energy, we have this drive, we have this passion, and we have this love for one another, and especially for our warriors back home, the elderly that are there riding their bikes for days just to join the protest, the Bibian that are there on the front lines, the people that are willing to risk everything they have for future generations. And this is a common theme that's been there since the beginning of time in Sikhi. So many of our older generations, only cared for our liberation, our enlightenment, our salvation, our spiritual journeys, and for them to pass on Sikhi to us and to pass on the ability for us to live, better lives than they did. And that's something that's always been there. So I think we start to realize that, and it can be easy for so many of us growing up to fight with our parents, on that culture gap and not understand them. But as we grow older, we understand that they sacrifice so much, and our older generations at home, they're continuing to do that. So it's bringing us together. And I've seen protests now that are starting to be outside news. news buildings and news stations, which is very good too. There's protests happening outside, like CNN in the States, and maybe, that's what we need to do more of as well. In addition to the consulates, to protest anywhere where there are news stations, and we're going to have to demand to be heard one way or the other. So I think it's good in that sense. It really shows what the people and their voice, leads to. What are when we get together, what we can demand, which is honestly nothing. Like it's crazy because, as a just logically speaking, we shouldn't have to demand for justice, for fairness, for truth. You would hope that these things would just be there, right? Out of common courtesy and respect for human beings, out of just decency. But that's not the state of the world right now. But I guess, we have to make it that way slowly but surely.
That's literally exactly what I was about to say. That the fact that people are having to still fight for basic rights is
Mhm.
it's so weird, and we can only hope that in the future, for the future generations, they don't have to do what we are doing at the moment, which is speaking about issues that we honestly shouldn't have to be speaking about right now. And a lot of people that are not speaking about it should also be talking about it to get rid of the problem, to find some sort of solution. But this feels like a very ongoing battle of just basic rights for a lot of Sikhs, a lot of Punjabis in India, and it's been happening for way too long. Like we shouldn't have to be continuing this battle the way that we are. But yeah, it does make me respect, everyone that is in India doing this. It's the largest human protest in the world right now. So
Mhm.
it makes me very happy that our bond is as strong as this, and it just shows that when we are together, we're a very, very, very strong community. And I feel like that is how our bond should be. We should be standing with each other at all times. And I feel like if COVID wasn't around either, you can only imagine how many more people would be involved in this cause of like going to do protests in different countries, and even in India itself. Like they really are risking their lives to try and fight for their kids and their grandkids, and the other generations to come. So yeah, people really do need to start talking about it a lot more. And I mean, you yourself have been speaking about it a lot, which is it's nice, and a lot of people do appreciate that, especially when you've written a lot of poetry about it. And I think in one of your poems, you wrote about Punjab being the breadbasket of India, which is interesting because it's also essentially the breadbasket of a lot of a lot of the world. A lot, like I think we are very lucky and very blessed to overlook a lot of it, because we just see food on our plate, but you know rarely do you ever think about where this food came from, who actually has put in the work to get us this food, and so that we can put it on our plate. So this was kind of an eye opener to not only Sikhs, but I hope a lot of other different communities as well, because this is an ongoing problem. Farmer suicide rates are just skyrocketing because of the doubt, because the amount of debt that they're in, and the doubt that they'll be able to pay all of that debt back, which is heartbreaking, that a lot of our elders have to go through that, and they have, as you said, sacrificed so much for us. Leading on from that and going back to what you said about philosophy, and bringing that into Sikhi as well. So obviously, as I said, you talk about a lot of Sikhi related topics in your poetry, and a lot of it is to do with, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, right? But I believe that philosophy is the study of reason, the study of truth, of like why we exist, of value, all of these things. How do you link philosophy to Sikhi, and then even beyond that, linking it to our reason of why we're here? Because as of right now, a lot of Sikhs are fighting for basic rights for our people back home. Um, so how can you link all three of them sort of together? And how did this outlook and this study of philosophy really help you as well?
So one thing for sure is that Gurbani, there's so much, logic and truth and reason to it. And, it has that ability to kind of mentally, smack you over the head and help you realize the faults that we all have, the errors that we all engage in, the mistakes that we do, and just the ways in which we think we're more clever than we are, and just a way to be more grateful and to understand, just as you were saying, farmers in Punjab, it's more than a bread basket for just India. You're right, and for people to actually start being more grateful about these types of things, Gurbani can do that. And an example of that would be, just yesterday, I saw a tweet that had said, "Doesn't it make you sick that other communities aren't really speaking up, for what's happening?" And I had replied that, it doesn't make me sick. It makes me grateful that, we're not like that our Sikhi, because of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, that we're blessed to have a deeper understanding of what it means to be human, right? And so those little shifts in perspective, I think it helps so much with that, philosophical understanding of Sikhi, because it helps alter our consciousness. It helps alter our mindset, where we're more, grateful. We don't get stuck drowning ourselves in negative emotion and being mad or being angry at, the external, at what things we can't control. Instead, it helps us invest internally and focus on gratitude, cultivate more empathy, and cultivate more compassion within. And those shifts in understanding are so helpful, because yeah, we are human. We're going to feel, angry or upset at times, but Sikhi helps us channel that in a more philosophical and deep way, where we can channel that energy into change, into meaningful change, rather than fixating upon lower emotions and vibrations, where we can get stuck complaining or just venting without thinking of, okay, I vented, now what do I do from this? Because it's easy to just get stuck in those cycles. So for sure, that's one aspect of how Sikhian philosophy helped me. Another is that, before being blessed with that journey of Sikhi 2 years ago, when I had stopped drinking and just became more immersed within Sikhi, was even something that many of us don't think of, right? Which is something that we don't think of, which is tied in with philosophy to me, which was our gaze. Because with Kirpa, I had started keeping my gaze before Sikhi, before I even started learning about Sikhi 2 years ago. Because for me, I think it came as a result of an inner healing journey, and just being really philosophical with why I was reliant or in need of external validation, which we all can be. And whether it's through clothing, or whether it's through a job, whether it's through a title, whether it's through our appearance, whether it's through going to the gym and working on our body, whatever it is, if we're always reliant on external validation or compliments or prestige to feel good, then it's always gonna be something that can be taken away, and we're always gonna be in search and in need of more. So for me, when I started to realize that so much of who I was, when I started to realize that so much of my habits, whether it's drinking or just who I was becoming, was an escape from a lot of childhood trauma and experiences that I hadn't healed from, it just really drove me to a journey of self-love from within. And that meant taking care of myself mentally, physically, and spiritually, but for myself. And when I started realizing that to only cut my hair or shave, or was an external representation of who I was, and that was always reliant on other people's perceptions, it stopped making sense to me why I would even want to do that to myself. Because the only reason we do it is because we've been taught that from a young age, to conform and to change. Whereas, if there's like hair on, say, your back or your shoulder, you don't really think about taking care of that or doing anything to that. But it's only what people can see you start to, and you get self-conscious, and it's an issue for everyone, right? Boys and girls growing up, whenever you get teased about something, whether it's hair, whether it's your nose, whether it's anything, ears, like your clothing, whatever it is, you start becoming self-conscious about that, and then you start trying to hide it, you start trying to disguise it, you start trying to take it away, whatever it is. So for me, getting back into philosophy meant cultivating a deeper sense of just being so content and full of love for myself that I felt no reason to change um, the divinity within me. And it's a natural process, right? um, Care isn't something that you have to keep. It's already there. It's We change it, and we go against nature, but really there's no reason to change it. It's all in our head. And when I started just understanding this, it helped me build that love for my hair. And then I started learning about in Sikhi, more about the sacrifices, the resistance, the just the love for the divine, that not even one of our ancestors and our shaheeds wanted to change that about themselves. And they wouldn't, in the face of conversion or violence, they still held on to their divinity. They held on to their mind. No one could take that away from them. And I think that's really important. And another thing was just concepts such as, ik one God, that one consciousness, that one truth. Prior to Sikhi, I was really working on myself internally and learning about spirituality, Buddhism, and just starting to see the world as one energy. And that led to me being vegetarian, because I just felt that the energy I was consuming from factory farms, from fast food restaurants, this was negative energy of animals who were tortured, abused, and killed purely for our taste buds. And to consume that energy was to consume pain and suffering. And when I started to see things as that one, energy, led to me being vegetarian. And then as I was, with Kirpa, I found myself, vegetarian, keeping my gaze, and I had stopped drinking. So at this point in time, that was when I was like, maybe this is a sign. Maybe I should learn about Sikhi. And that's when I started going, with Kirpa back to the Gurdwara, watching these videos on YouTube about basics of Sikhi and all of these things. And that was when all of what I learned just through life was applicable through a philosophical context for me, through concepts such as ik one God and selfless service and seva and all of these things, that gaze, it just fit for me. It just like clicked, everything was like a piece of the puzzle for me.
Do you feel as though Sikhi helped you find that reason to exist, despite there being so much, not just like Maya, but also there's so many distractions? Um, as you said, like you had an alcohol addiction and there was a lot of violence around you. So do you think Sikhi kind of took you away from that, but also gave you self-validation to know that, in the future or like within your life, you've actually found your reason?
I mean, with Kirpa, I owe all of that to God, but a lot of that happened. Like it wasn't that I had stopped drinking or done X, Y, or Z for Sikhi.
Mhm.
So um, it was just a part of my journey. And I think what made that meaningful for me was that I was just focused on, loving myself and filling myself up with love for myself, so that I could be a better person, not just for me, but for the people around me and for the world at large. And I was already invested in that journey. And because I was so invested in that, and it came from an authentic place, and it came from a truthful place where I started to really grapple with, the shadow side of my ego, and to work on my own toxic tendencies, my own ways in which I could be, not such a good influence or presence just for others. And because I wanted to be honest with myself and work on myself, I was so invested in that for years that, with Kirpa, Sikhi came about as the kind of, you could say, like the final result of that, because I had been investing in myself, whether, going to the gym or learning about philosophy, yoga, meditation. And ultimately, Sikhi was that thing that just brought all of that together. And it provided me with a truer and deeper understanding of why I was here. Because up until that point, I felt like, yeah, my life wanted to be about service. It wanted to be about helping others, being a kind of role model for the younger me that I never had to that I never got a chance to have. So being my own childhood hero in a sense. But with Sikhi, it gave so much more to that. It kind of brought that all into context and helped me understand that I was just on a spiritual journey, and that's the most important aspect, and everything else comes secondary.
As well as being a role model to yourself, you mentioned before how you were helping young kids in like Gurdwara, and talking to them about, you know, situations that they had faced, and almost mentoring them and helping them out in those situations. So tell us more about that, like what it is that you do, and maybe the types of issues that kids will bring forward to you, and your response to that.
Sure. So a lot of that, it was weekly prior to COVID. It was weekly sangat where I just created, along with um, an older brother of mine who has been doing, more of an uncle, has been doing the class for decades actually. Um, so with Gerpa, it was just about creating a more open and safe space for young students, young kids to open up, express themselves, whether it's through a notebook that's anonymous, whether it's through just sharing and voicing their concerns, anything to do with, sometimes, we'd split up the kids from the parents. So anything to do with issues at home, anything to do with school, anything to do with bullying, anything to do with being teased, literally just anything that they wanted to express. Could be, suffering from drinking, or friends that they felt were bad influences, and how to really just work on ways to overcome that, to feel better, to find resources, to have people come speak with them at home, or for me to just pay forward my lessons that I learned that helped me. And it was really just a way of giving back to the community, because growing up there weren't many people, not many at all, actually, just that one Uncle G that I just referred to, who really at the Gurdwara spoke about Sikhi in English. And and it was a way to just foster that connection between the youth who don't have those roots yet, with Sikhi, with understanding Arbani, and to be able to create that space for them first, so that they actually feel that, that they're able to express themselves and to feel understood, especially at the Gurdwara. Otherwise, they're kind of just sitting there and not really understanding what the purpose of it is. And and so it was a way to gain just a stronger sense of sangat. And as a result of that, it led to, parents reaching out, and just through word of mouth, just people wanting to just learn more from Uncle G and me about our lessons, and doing workshops about mental health, about substance abuse, about parenting, about psychology, and working a lot, with the subconscious mind of how to change ourselves for the better.
I was going to add to that as well. So you know, you've been speaking to children about, would you say children, or like what sort of age range do you reckon that?
It's so the age, it's children from the age of even 5, 6 sometimes, to all the way up until adults in their 30s and 40s.
Oh wow, so they will bring a vast majority of like different problems or issues that they face, but I can imagine a lot of them are to do with, as you said before, like our identity in Sikhi, and a lot of it too would be to do with bullying. But
Hmm.
especially now, I feel like a lot of kids are being more exposed to worldly issues, like the farmer protests, and you know, starting to learn more about 1984 as things start to come out a lot more, because now we have platforms like Instagram to talk to people about, because a lot of like Sikh families are very silent on what happened in 1984, and that's probably out of fear of, you know, talking about something that could get you in a lot of trouble, but also bringing up a past that is very difficult to talk about for a lot of our elders. So you know, if a child was to come to you and express how difficult it is for them right now to keep their Sikhi, because they're scared about what is happening in the world, and how people are looking at them and perceiving them to, you know, as terrorists or extremists, would be your advice? Because I feel like that's something that a lot of kids are experiencing now within their schools, or but just reading about it and seeing that the media is portraying them a certain way. Because even in my last podcast I spoke about how the way that media talks about the kind of stereotypical man and woman is very different to how Sikhi is in the sense of guess itself. Women should women shouldn't be hairy, but it makes it very difficult for girls, and I think men deal with that issue as well. So how would like what would your advice be to a child who is struggling to keep their Sikhi because of what media is telling them, and because what they're reading online, or because of what their peers are saying to them?
Yeah, for sure. That is definitely a challenge for many of us, and in our society, for sure, it's so much harder, right, for women to have that relationship with gays, just because of how conditioned we are to view femininity and masculinity, and it being looked like it just being so normalized, right, within the media for women not to have hair on their arms, for example, even during like movies or TV shows where there's like a zombie apocalypse. But even then, right, the women that are portrayed in something like that, they still have hairless arms. And it's little things like that that just program us to normalize our perception of what masculine and feminine is. Um, but really, all these things, what they do, men face it too on a lesser level, but they still face it. But what these things do is they just take away our power and our sovereignty, and they allow us to kind of be puppets for media, for corporations, for companies like Gillette, for the profit of other people. And when we give away our attention or our power or our autonomy to the world, we give away a part of ourselves, a part of our divine, understanding of who we are, and it's hard to reclaim that back. The moment we start giving in to Maya and the world is the moment we start losing everything that makes us us, and from a spiritual level. And it gets harder to get back on that spiritual journey to the deepest of levels, because everything that our ancestors and Shahid sacrificed for us, it wasn't in a way to make us feel guilty, right? Like, oh, the people did this for you, why aren't you doing this? No, it was a way for them to help us understand that the most powerful and divine thing we have is our connection to our guru and to God. And to keep that means that we can't give in, right, to the world, to Maya, to people who use greed and the thirst for power to take away from us. And I would definitely recommend reading up on our history, reading up and watching videos on basics of Sikhi, on Nanak Nam, of why our identity, why our case is so meaningful, and challenges and stories of what helped people overcome those challenges, and what helped people overcome any sort of doubt or insecurity, because we all have insecurities, we all have doubts at certain points in our life, and everyone, literally, everyone, it's part of life to feel self-conscious or insecure about different things. But really, the only thing that will take care of that is nam and love from within for ourselves. And if we don't work on that, and if we don't do that now, all we end up doing is again losing a part of ourselves that becomes hard to find after. And it puts us on a trajectory of life where you end up just becoming someone that you're not going to be happy with. And I can attest to that, because for 19 years, I literally felt, looking back, that that wasn't ever really me, you know? It feels like, with Gerpa, I found my way back to who I was, but it kind of feels like when you do give in and when you do shy away from who you are as a natural divine person, and that includes our case, when you shy away from that, you allow others to change the trajectory of your life. And you allow others to take you away from hukam and from the natural course of how our divine journey should be. And that's a challenge we all have to take on, because it's a part of life, and it's a part of life to overcome challenges, because God gives his or her hardest challenges and tests to their strongest warriors. So for sure, I think youth and kids and just anyone should know that there are going to be challenges, but whatever doesn't kill us, makes us stronger. And a part of Sikhi is to take our pain, our challenges, our experiences, and find that silver lining and remain in Chardikla and make the best of it.
I agree. Sometimes you have to unlearn what you've learned to progress. And a lot of that can come from unlearning the bad and learning the good. Knowledge is definitely something that helps build anyone, and knowledge about where you've come from, and not only you but like your ancestors, our Guru Sahibs. Learning all of that definitely makes us stronger, and now when we're perceived as terrorists or extremists, like this is where we need that strength the most.
So I mentioned that I was away from, Sikhi and the Gurdwara for a long time, from the moment I cut my hair to about 2 years ago. But actually, in between that time, for a year, when I was 16 years old, my mom, she took me to the Gurdwara, to not the closest Gurdwara near us. She actually took us to the Gurdwara that I was gifted, these past 2 years to help Sangat with those classes. And that was the first time I learned about Sikhi from, again, Uncle Ji, who was teaching that class. And I went there for a year, every week on Fridays. And after that year, I stopped, right? I kind of got myself into trouble. So I wasn't, my mom basically was like, okay, you have to come with me every week. So I did that. And with Kirpa, I was doing a lot of seva. And that's when I started to do Simran at the Gurdwara. And it was very powerful. But after that year, and when I got into uni, so now I was 17, Maya came back, right? The drinking came back, the pull towards these friendships and toxic relationships and all these things came back. And I was actually growing my hair at that point. I don't know why. Like I had no reason, in a way to know the meaning, the significance behind it. I just felt like it was so peaceful and powerful being in that state. But I didn't have the deeper understanding, right, philosophically and spiritually of what Sikhi meant. The class, Uncle Ji did a great job, right, of what he could, but it didn't register for me because I'm really someone that needs to understand something deeply before it clicks and before I apply it to my life. And so for me, the Maya came back, and 2 years ago with Kirpa, I went back to that class, and that was when I found out more about small gums and Ranswise and just Sikh organizations that helped everything come full circle today. But the point I want to make is that we're all going to have ups and downs, whether in life or whether it's through Sikhi, and we all are going to fall off, whether that's before Sikhi, during Sikhi, whether that's when you're blessed with Amrit, whether that's after. I know that it's so common for so many of us to think, I only want to be blessed with Amrit when I know that I'm just so full of that discipline and full of that that I don't want to make a mistake. And I don't think that's it could be the case for a few people, but I don't think that's realistic. I think it's okay to accept that we're all going to make mistakes, that wherever we are on our journey, it's okay to stumble, but it's about coming back stronger. And that's always been an aspect of Sikhi. And we shouldn't forget that Dhan Guru Gobind Singh Ji forgave the Chali Mukte, and that he was forgiving, that our Guru is forgiving, and that it's okay to struggle. And what we really need to do is find ways to come together as Sangat and grow stronger and forgive each other and unite. And as we can see now, there's so much going on in the world that is only making us show people who we are as Sikhs and show people that we are providing langar in the face of police attacking us. We are uniting across places. Like I didn't even know that there was big Sikh communities in places like Venice or Switzerland or Germany, so many places around the world where people are coming together. So again, let's leave behind the doubt and the separation and the feeling that we're not good enough, and let's just work on ourselves in any way we can and take those steps to join together and connect with Guruji, because that's the only thing that really matters. And And just as I alluded to earlier, the Maya that kept me away from it, all is that too was from the age of 18 onwards, another, right, 10, 11 years of a lack of fulfillment when I could have had a much more fulfilling, easier life back then. But I'm glad everything came full circle, and I'm able to now use those experiences in a way to help myself and help others. But it could have saved a lot of pain and trauma as well. So I just want people to maybe just remind people of how loving, how blissful, how peaceful Sikhi is, and how our Guru can help us, and to just embrace the fact that struggle is a part of it, and it will only make us stronger.
Definitely. This life itself is filled with so many hardships. You can't pressure yourself so much when it comes to Sikhi. Sikhi should be something that's so easy to gain and to retrieve, but also to find. And the second we start saying, you know, you can't mess up, you can't do this, you can't do that, it's very difficult for the younger generation. I'm talking about kids here because kids are the one that absorb like the most amount of energy. And the second you start, you know, introducing them to things that they can't do, kids don't like that. They'll end up backing off or taking a back seat slightly. So yeah, it
Mhm.
is. I appreciate what you said in the sense of like knowing that Guru Sahib is forgiving, and that you will mess up. You could mess up, but as long as you bounce back, that's the main thing.
For sure, I agree completely. That's one thing that and holds off many youth and kids is that feeling of stigma and shame of not being good enough, and that's something, you know, hopefully we're working together as a bunch to overcome.
So thank you for joining me. We discussed quite a lot there, and I'm hoping that, you know, a lot of people take on board the things that you said. And as always, if we have said anything wrong, please do forgive us. We are always constantly learning. But Jaskanwal, just in case anyone doesn't know where they can find you, please let them know about your Instagram and what it is that you do, as well as your book.
Sure. So my Instagram is jaskanwal.singh. That's JASKANWAL.singh. And on Twitter, it's Jaskanwal Singh _ and what I do is, in addition to writing, I've published a book, which I alluded to earlier. I'm continuing to write books. I am studying for my bar exams. I'm hoping to use my legal education and my law degree um, in tandem with my passion for social justice and advocacy and Sikhi to serve the Band to implement policy change, whether through education or through fighting against bills that ban, you know, religious symbols, which has happened here in addition to France, um, which includes the turban, the hijab, and you know, using just my passion and my advocacy for those things. I also work with youth and adults with mental health workshops, substance abuse prevention, and just spiritual wellness to provide just advice and lessons that have helped me just to pay that forward. So really what I do is anything I can within my power to serve, whether from a legal perspective, from my writing, from books, or just from workshops dealing with the issues that I've faced.